Hey, welcome to the New England Endurance Podcast, where we celebrate the vibrant endurance community in New England. And I'm your host, Art Trapotsis, along with my co-host, Eric Schenker.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year, even though this may come a couple weeks into the new year.
Happy New Year, Eric. So the endurance community is huge here in New England, and folks want to hear from endurance athletes and organizations. That's our purpose, basically. And today, I think we take it to another level with someone I have a ton of respect for. I think he's a living legend in our local cycling community and beyond. And we have the one and only Adam Myerson. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, guys.
So Adam is joining us fresh off of winning the US Cyclocross title for the men's 50-plus category, I believe. He's
That is known, though, as the most competitive category, right? Like men 50-plus. Let's be clear. That's the most coveted. And then when we get into 60, that will then become the most coveted. So I just wanted to make sure everybody knew that.
You're not entirely wrong, and it sounds like a funny thing to say, but I think the reason why there's some truth in what you're saying is not solely because it's the age group that I'm in.
Or both of us, all three of us are in.
Well, it's actually the peak of the population curve. So since I was a junior, there have been a lot of bike racers in this age bubble who maybe came into the sport in the Le Mans years. And that population peak has been moving through the sport. And so when I was racing, when I did 45 plus, that was the biggest field. And it was always the feature event of the day. And then I noticed when I turned 50 that it shifted, and the 50 plus seems to be the one that everybody talks about, gets hyped about, and is also the biggest field. So I think that same group of guys, if we can keep ourselves alive, maybe that will continue to be the case when we're at 55, 60. I doubt it very much, but right now it's a good one to win. I'm happy. Yeah.
All right, I feel so validated.
Yeah. Like, you were kind of joking, but actually there's something there.
So listen, we know Adam well, just from, being in the cycling community, but the folks listening to the podcast, we've got swimmers and runners and rowers. I got to give a little bit more of a background here about Adam. So he's a former pro cyclist who specializes not only in cyclocross, but also criteriums, otherwise known as crits. And Adam's day job is the president and head coach of Cycle Smart Inc. And I think Eric is going to tell us a little bit more as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to shorten the list of his accolades, or else we'll just talk about that for 45 minutes. But we'll do a couple highlights here. We're gonna thoroughly embarrass Adam. So let me just list off a couple here. 97 collegiate national cyclocross champion. Adam, where did you go to school?
UMass Amherst.
UMass Amherst in New England. Correct answer.
For a long time.
2-time Masters Continental Cyclocross champion. 5-time Masters National Cyclocross champion, Masters Road and Crit champion. He is the organizer of the infamous and long-standing Northampton Cyclocross race. He's the former president of the New England Cyclocross Series, former at-large USA Cyclocross committee, former member of UCI Cyclocross Commission, and I think he's probably most proud as a husband and proud parent. So hopefully we didn't embarrass you too much, Adam, but it's a really impressive resume, and excited to have you on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks.
So Adam, that's a ton of contribution to our community. You basically dedicated most of your life to cycling as either an athlete or a contributor. And I don't know if anybody's told you this recently, but I just want to say thank you for all that you've done and continue to do for the sport. You do a ton. And I'd like to kick off actually with the first question. My own question I'd love to hear the answer to is, looking back on those 30 plus years of racing, what was your proudest moment?
Sheesh, it's my proudest moment.
Or what result are you most proud of?
Because my proudest moment has all come recently, and I know we're going to talk about parenting later, but I'm so psyched to be out there with my kid. And so when I think about things I'm proud of, I think about watching my son race. So
he's racing bikes?
Yeah. I'll hold off on that and try to. You're asking me a question about me, but immediately, when I think about pride, I'm so proud of him and the efforts that I'm making, as a parent. But as an athlete, what am I most proud of? Yeah, I know it's hard to find one thing because, generally speaking, I'm proud of my career. I'm proud that I was able to turn pro finally and eventually after a decade of trying in the 90s when if you were trying to race clean, it wasn't really the great time to be trying to be a professional bike racer, even in the United States as a clean athlete. And I didn't really understand how big a challenge that was for me at the time when I was in my 20s. And there's a lot of things that should have materialized for me when I was racing full time and sleeping in my car and driving around from race to race and living off prize money. As an amateur in the 90s, when I was in my 20s, there's a career that I should have had and didn't, that I only understand, with a historical lens. And then, I gave up on that and got a job and started coaching. And I didn't turn pro until I was 30, the year I turned 31, after I'd already been a full-time bike racer and said, okay, well, this is as good as I'm going to get. I'm never going to turn pro. I'm finishing up school. I got to pay my student loans. I'm getting married. There are all these reasons to stop chasing that dream and kind of giving up on that. But as you know, I kept racing because I like racing. I'm a lifer. And I learned that then that I was unhappy if I wasn't training every day and racing. Then I got a second chance. When the sport really kind of blew up in the 2000s, and there was a lot of .com money and a lot of pro teams, the sport kind of came down and scooped me back up where these teams needed riders and they needed experienced riders. There were whole teams of neo pros. And so, my first one, sportsbook.com was the team. Bill Laudine, a guy named Bill Laudine, who I'd known for a long time. And really grateful to Bill for kind of knowing what I was capable of and deciding that when he finally had the money to put a team together, again, a team full of neo pros, me included, technically speaking, that he asked me to be the captain of that team. That was the sort of second act of my career and where I finally did turn pro. And then I was pro for 13 years. Once I finally got in, I thought, hey, I got my 1 year as a pro. I can get chip off my shoulder. Then I just kept getting another contract and another contract. And then I got a divorce and then I got another contract. And that's when my career really took off. When I think about things I'm proud of, I'm proud, generally speaking, I'm proud of the way I did it. I'm proud that I didn't alter my appearance to get a contract or fit in. I didn't quiet myself to get a contract or be more digestible or acceptable to people. And this is a time before social media and phones, and people didn't really know what to do with me in the 90s. My appearance was even more extreme then, and it didn't make sense to a lot of people. And so I think I was able to really hit my stride in the 2000s. But by then, my best seasons came in my late 30s, and who knows what I would have done in my 20s with those same opportunities. But once I finally had a real salary and some support, and I had my coaching business had started at that point, and I had some financial security that I never had, and I could do the training that I wanted to do, I was able to finally show what I was capable of, and it was satisfying. So I'm proud of doing it my way, and being able to sort of finally let people get to know me, who I really am, what I really stand for, and I think a lot of people misjudged me in that part of my career, which was easy to do.
I appreciate your nod to Frank Sinatra there with the "I did it my way."
Yeah,
I think it's longevity is amazing, right? I think longevity in anything that you do, but certainly as an athlete, to make a living at whatever definition of that you want it to be, right? Maybe not living in your car is a definition of being a successful professional athlete.
I bought a house.
You bought a house. I mean, that is pretty amazing to think about. And like you said, to intertwine it into a coaching business and everything that you still do today is pretty amazing. Were you always a cyclist? What was your journey into endurance sports?
Yeah, I think the perseverance and persistence part is going to be a thread through this whole thing. And I do think it's yes, also a thing that I'm very proud of, part of how I did this. And Art, you talked about being a lifer and all the contributions, and that comes from that because that all started very early. So I grew up in Brockton, single mom, 3 little sisters, not a lot of resources, not a lot of supervision, and found my way, I guess you could say. I grew up in the 80s punk scene, hardcore, straight edge. I think that was my family. Those are my guiding principles. My dad is Jewish, my mom's Catholic, so I've always had that. Also, having a moral code has always been, for whatever reason, part of how I guided myself through all the space that I had available to me, there's a lot of trouble to get into if I wanted to, but also a lot of opportunities. Brockton is that kind of place. The first thing I probably got serious about was skateboarding, riding my skateboard, going to shows, music, just 80s punk.
What kind of board did you have? Did you have a Powell Peralta?
No, I didn't actually, because the things that I was into and the style that I was into was more Alva than Powell
Tony
Peralta.
Alva, nice. That's what I had.
The Clean Cut Kids had Powell Peralta stuff. The street punks had Alva. I mean, not that I buy into that these days, but that's maybe what we thought at the time. That was where I gravitated. So Fred Smith, Bill Danforth, those are boards that I liked and skated at, and skaters that I really liked. I also was into roller skating. We had a roller rink in Whitman that we went to, and they had a speed skating team. And just from going to the roller rink for social reasons, I started doing the practices there and got into roller speed skating. And I played soccer. I played a lot of other sports growing up, like everybody did, but individual sports really, I think, attracted me, and not ball sports outside of soccer, really. But I was probably 12, 13, 14. I wanted to get better at roller skating. And so I had a 10-speed, just a cheap 10-speed. I don't even know where that came from. And I just started riding it. Travis Cycle, it's a bike shop in Brockton. It was also a skate shop at the time. So I was in there all the time buying skateboard stuff. And I started riding with those guys from the shop, a guy named Dave Lawson, and all the guys that were associated with that shop. They were all 10 years older than me, and they just took me under their wing. They knew I needed help. They knew I needed big brothers, father figures. Those guys saved my life. Dave took me to all my first punk shows, took me to the channel for the Sunday matinees. We would go race Wells Ave on Sunday mornings, and we would put the bikes in the back of his Volkswagen Rabbit and drive to the channel and go to the all ages shows. So I saw so many amazing shows when I was 14, 15 that he took me to. And so,
that's cool.
Yeah, I just started going on group rides with those guys in like my Nike Cortez with like a slot cut in the sole so it would fit into the toe clips into the pedal. I mean, this is how I was getting it done. Like I didn't have money for shoes or like cycling stuff. And so I was like, oh, if I just kind of slice in my sneakers, they'll grab the pedal like a cleat. And so, Hawaiian shorts and sliced up Nike Cortez.
I've never heard
it. Like, could you feel that was where you were supposed to be on the bike? I mean, so you sort of stumbled into it, I guess you could say. But when you got there, was that where you were meant to be?
Sort of. It was amazing to me to get so far away from home and get out of the neighborhood. And like, I can remember my first 50-mile ride with a guy named Mark Kavanaugh. And I just couldn't believe that I had ridden 50 miles. I was probably 14 and like, I didn't have a phone or anything. Like, I mean, I couldn't have been further away from home, but I was getting good grades and I wasn't doing drugs and my mom didn't have to worry about me. I had the 3 little sisters she had to take care of and I was off doing what I was doing. When I started racing with the shop, I did like it. But at the end of that first season of Citizens Racing and getting my racing license, Dave Lawson bought me my racing license for my 16th birthday. And that's when I got my first USCF license. And I raced district road championships and I qualified for nationals and I went to nationals. It was this whole adventure. Dave took me to Pennsylvania, took me to nationals. Like, again, like dad, I did not have, right? Big brother, I did not have. At the end of that season, I was like, this is stupid. I'm not doing this. It doesn't align with my values. Like, I didn't enter skateboard contests. This sport is expensive. I don't care if I'm faster than anybody. I don't want to live my life in this capitalist competition mentality, right? So again, This is like 80s punk mindset. And I was like, these aren't my values. And a guy named Jesse Bushnell, who passed away a couple of years ago, unfortunately, was from Rhode Island as a junior that I got to be friends with. And he was also in the same stuff I was. And he just called me all winter. Dude, you got to race again. We had such a good time. Like, we can ride for Mass Bay Road Club. Like, we're going to both get on this team. It's going to be so awesome. And so I didn't ride that whole winter, but he convinced me to get back on. Once the kind of weather started to get nicer, I was like, well, I do kind of miss riding. And then I was in.
Wow.
And the way I came back around to it was just, I realized I can play this game of bike racing and stay detached from it saying anything about whether I'm better than somebody or not. And once I was able to see that and approach sports in general that way. Even as a 16-year-old, the only way I could do it was to recognize like, well, I'm just playing a game out here with everybody else, and whether I win or lose, it doesn't say anything about whether I'm a better person than everybody else. It's just, I'm going to do the training because I like doing this, and I loved racing. I mean, I really did. Like, I like going fast. I like corners. I like tactics, just like I was playing chess. Like, but it didn't make me a better person to be good at it than anybody else. And if I could just stay mindful of that, then that's what allowed me to go all in for it and not feel like I was betraying my own personal values. And I've kept that with me to this day.
And I think that's a great story. And I think that's what makes you a great coach. So I first met you, I don't know if you remember this, it was 1998. We were at Cycle Loft. I was on NEBC, and they said, hey, we're going to have Adam Myerson come by and, tell us a little bit about racing for those that never raced before. And you came by, and I'll never forget that because it stuck with me, just some of the things you spoke about and, drafting and whatnot. But when did you start coaching, and how did Cycle Smart sort of come to be?
Well, I spent, like I said, the 90s. Oh, sorry. I do remember doing that at Cycloc. And ironically, I just got an email from NEBC asking me if I'd like to come speak to the club. I have not done it since then. And NEBC is not the same club it was then. So I was surprised to get that message. I'm really looking forward to it. So it might be a little bit different than what I did, 20 years ago or 25 years ago now. But it was funny coincidence. Yeah. Basically, I had great coaches to start with at a time where people didn't always have coaching. So when I got serious, I joined Mass Bay Road Club, and they had a sort of a professional level junior team, Plymouth Reebok, which is like a national junior team. And then they had the Mass Bay Road Club, like club junior team. And I had hoped to get on Plymouth Reebok, but the program ended the year I got on Mass Bay Road Club. And so it was still one of the best junior teams at the time in the region, and probably one of the best teams in the country in terms of like support and the program. And Bill Sykes was the club president, along with Diane Fortini, who took over for him. And Bill was basically my first coach. He owned the Corner Cycle Shop in Plymouth, and I used to ride down there from Brockton, or I would go to Wampatuck and meet them at Wampatuck. And then I'd spend most of the week down in Plymouth, staying with my friend Bill McKernan, who also worked at the shop and was an few years older than me and worked at Corner Cycle as well, who I'm still in touch with. And it was a way for me to get out of Brockton, get out of my house, and make some money. I could go down there and train on nicer training roads, and then I could work at the shop for a few hours a day. And Bill wrote my first training program, basically straight out of the Greg LeMond book. He wrote 12, 14, 16, 18. These are the hours to go do sprints, intervals. It's like, if you read the Greg LeMond book, it's straight out of the book. When I was 19, I hired Paul Curley, his first coach that I paid. And I learned a lot from Paul. And
another
this is a time
living legend.
Yeah, right. I wouldn't be here without Paul. New England bike racing wouldn't exist without Paul. But I learned a lot from Paul. A lot of people who maybe don't even know he existed or exists don't realize how much they do as a result of things we learned from Paul that have been handed down to them. But Paul was using a methodology that he had learned from his time racing cyclocross in Switzerland, and a coach named Paul Kirkley, who was Greg LeMond's coach. And so I was basically getting like second, third hand Swiss national team, Paul Kirkley, Helvetia coaching that came down through Paul to me. And that was what I was doing when I was trying to turn pro in the 90s. And when I gave up on that, I really was sad about it. I really was depressed. I mean, I had this dream. I chased it for a decade. I thought I was good enough to do it. And everybody just kept getting better about me. Like I'd get to a level, and I watched Tyler Hamilton break through, and just a lot of guys around me, for some reason, would get to the point where they'd have these big breakthroughs. We were all pretty similar. All of a sudden they would go up a level. And I was like, when is my body going to mature? When am I going to just get, and what I didn't understand is guys were starting to dope. And that was the big jump that they were making in the breakthrough there. And that wasn't happening to me. And I was still naive about it at the time. I thought I could race in the US clean, and I guess I did. I still believe that. But those big jumps that those guys were making was, I only learned later, was a result of those guys doping. So when I stopped, just as a way to soothe myself, I started coaching juniors. Marco Wise was running the NEXA junior team, the New England Cycling Support Association. And I started just volunteering to coach some juniors in that program. I was doing some camps and clinics for them and helping the kids out. Like Justin Spinelli was one of those kids A lot of the kids in that group actually went on to turn pro. And once I started coaching them for free, like word got out that I was coaching and people started calling. Hey, I heard you're coaching. I'd like to hire you. What are you charging? And I was like, what are you talking about? What do you mean? What am I charging? I was working at VO Max doing inside sales. I was doing custom team clothing sales and driving from Northampton up to Plainfield into the hill towns every day to sit in the office at the factory and call all my friends and convince them to buy cycling clothing from Vince O'Connell. And I did that for about 9 months, and it wasn't good. I was very, very depressed. Well, I like that job. I mean, I like Team Kit. We could give a call about Team Kit. I did that job for a bunch of different companies. I did it for Charlie Eisendorf. We did Alexa and like a bunch of other brands, but that was part of the hustle, right? I had to find a way to make a little bit of living, but I hated it. And I started letting people pay me $50 a month to coach them. And then before I knew it, I had 30 people. And I quit VO Max and I stopped setting an alarm clock and started riding every day and working essentially for myself. And I was making enough money from that. But then very quickly, I was like, I can't coach more people. 30 people is too much. I think 20 is like, if you want to have a relationship with your athletes, like 20 is a good maximum. And so I started trying to raise the rates, but I was just turning people down. I had more people asking than I could coach. But I had a bunch of friends who were Cat 1s with exercise science degrees who were like working at car washes part-time to make enough money to keep racing bikes. And I was like, come on over, man. Let me coach you for 3 months. Let me show you the program. I've documented everything I'm doing. I've written a training manual. Like I have materials now. And there were no other coaching companies really at the time. It was Friel and Carmichael and CycleSmart.
There were books, right? Like it was like you go into Barnes and Noble and you could buy the book training for, how to train for cycling. But that was it. There was no,
Yeah.
he was giving you anything back from those books. There was no internet, right?
Yeah. You were being coached by some curmudgeonly older guy in your cycling club. That's most cycling knowledge was osmosis on the group rides. You got hazed, you got shouted at. And that's how you learned. There's for better or for worse, generally for worse. That's not the way we want to get it done these days. But I learned a lot being hazed on those group rides. I wouldn't call it the welcoming environment we're trying to create for people these days. But if you could survive it, that's how hazing is. I'm not trying to emulate that. But yeah, and so very quickly I had associate coaches and I incorporated CycleSmart. And all of a sudden I owned a business. I wasn't just a cycling coach. Now I was a owner of a coaching company. That was 99. And by 2000, 2001, we had an office in downtown Northampton and more coaches. John Verheuel came to work for me. Al Donahue eventually later, who still works for me. And I, again, wasn't expecting to turn pro. This was what I was going to do for my job. So when I got the opportunity to turn pro, I was like, I think I can do this. I mean, it was a $2,000 contract, right? It wasn't like I was going to live off of it, but it was just enough to justify doing the training and doing the travel. And it certainly was compatible with the coaching company. And of course, I had started running the Northampton race while I was still in college. I was 19 when that started, and I was still putting that race on every year. And so I've always been unable to help myself in terms of I could do a better job of this. I could fix this, or I see how they're doing that. I think they should do it this way. I'm not going to complain to them. I'm just going to do it. I'm going to run a race the way I think a race should get run, or I'm going to coach people on what I've learned after 10 years of dedicating myself to this and trying to make myself a better athlete. What have I learned about the sport? And I guess what I quickly learned was, because I had a lot of self-doubt when I first started. I was like, well, I have an English and African American studies degree. Why would you hire me to coach you? I realized that I had an ability to identify all the little things that you needed to do to be good at bike racing, not just the exercise science part, but the practical part. How to pack your bag, how to wash your bike, how to pedal less, how to read a race, just everything, every aspect of the culture of bike racing, in addition to the exercise science. I've taken plenty of exercise science classes. You can teach yourself exercise science. But I had the experiential knowledge of having dedicated myself to the craft. And I was able to identify that and effectively communicate that to people. And they got better. And I was like, okay, I'm not bad at this. Maybe
So
maybe this is what I should be doing.
I want to point something out. You mentioned pedaling less, and I remember me and my wife, we worked with John Verheuel through CycleSmart. That was one of our best seasons we had. I do remember, I think he and possibly you at some point spoke to us about the art of wheel sucking, and to this day on group rides, I'm pretty good at that, and that's how I survive, in my old 50+ age. That was a good couple of years we had with the John Verheuel training program through CycleSmart.
I'm glad to hear it.
And do you work with cyclists at all levels? Are you working with Cat 5s just getting started all the way up to Cat 1s, or is it only really makes sense after, they maybe reach a Cat 3 level?
No. Personally, so there's 6 coaches in the company, and everybody has their preferences, right? And, we all love cyclocross, so I think that's one thing that we all have. But some of the coaches prefer to work with athletes at the highest level because they maybe feel that that's where they're going to get most challenged themselves, or where they can add the most value. And I have other coaches that prefer to work with beginners or lower level athletes because they enjoy watching that improvement or helping people with the basics. All of my coaches do all of that for everybody, and they are all capable of it. For me personally, as a coach, I do like in the middle. I have athletes that are racing full time and either are pro or trying to turn pro. I worked with Taylor Cook White for the past few years, and she's been a professional criterium racer and other disciplines, cyclocross as well, mountain biking for the past few years. But I am also the coach of the New England Devo junior team. So I get brand new 15, 16-year-olds, sometimes 13, 14-year-olds, who I'm trying to teach about how much drink mix to put in their water bottles. So I value the relationship part, and that's what maybe I'm best at. I have other coaches who are maybe very focused on the science and very focused on, let's say, if you're designing a training program for someone, how effective is the intervention? What is happening metabolically? How are we measuring the effectiveness of that particular interval for that particular athlete? All my coaches can do that. Some of my coaches enjoy that part more than others. So I'm still an English teacher at heart, if you know what I mean. And so when I think about, I don't have an exercise science degree, I have an English degree. Well, I had thought I'd be teaching English, but instead of grad school, I raced my bike. And so I'm sort of
I was gonna say, loaded question here though, Adam, on the coaching. And it's interesting. This is going to be a tough question to answer. But what do you hope that your athletes get out of your coaching, right? Like somebody that, let's say, has not had a coach before, like Art, he showed up at NEBC and he's like, wow, this is amazing. But if you look back on it, what is it that you hope your athletes get out of your coaching?
Yeah, better at life, period. It's actually not that hard to answer. I hope they get better at bike racing. But I'll give you an example with coaching the juniors. Most of those kids are not going to be professional bike racers. Most of them, I think, hope to be or want to find out if they're good enough. I wouldn't say that's necessarily all of their goals, but they're at the point where everything's possible. And so I keep everything possible for them. I don't rule anything out. If a 15-year-old comes to the group and says, I want to win the Tour de France, I'm at the point now where I take that seriously, because you don't know. I coach everybody the same in the sense that whatever their motivation is, whatever they're going to bring, whatever energy they've got for it, I want to match their energy. The more they can give me, the more I'm going to give them back. You want enthusiasm, right? But for all those kids, a lot of them don't make it past freshman year of college. If they go on to college, most of them aren't going to turn professional. But what I want is for them all to love bike racing and to have become better people in the time that they spent working with me, that they can solve their problems, that they use bike racing as a metaphor for all of the other challenges that they're going to have in their life.
Critical thinkers. We call that critical thinking skills.
Yeah, that's right. There's a lot of analytical reasoning that happens in bike racing. I want them to learn how to get along with other people. I'm just one of the mentors in their lives, right? I'm not their parent, I'm not their guidance counselor. Somewhere in the middle of those things. So yeah, whether it's the juniors or anyone who comes on to work with me, there's just so much therapy in my style of coaching. And that hour that we spend on the phone each week talking about training is going to have a lot of life coaching in it. that hopefully isn't just about bike racing.
I love that.
I didn't get that till college. I'm just saying, Art and I talk a lot about rowing, and my rowing coach, Tom Beetham, I'll give him a shout out. Like, he provided a lot of what you're talking about, Adam. And I would say it would be a force multiplier to start getting that in high school, right? Like the earlier you get that kind of advice,
Yeah.
it's a force multiplier for life. So great answer.
Yeah. Coaching, in a way, coaching juniors can be easy because you have puberty on your side. If your juniors don't get better, if you're a coach of juniors and they don't get better, you're really screwing up. You're really doing something wrong, right? And so with the juniors, I'm teaching them how to train, and I'm keeping them out of the trouble, and I'm letting puberty do a certain amount of the work. And there's a point where it's about the work that they're doing. There'll be a point where, like, okay, guys, this is where the difference between you and the other juniors is going to happen, right? So you have to focus a lot on getting them through high school. And so the life coaching is really important.
So I'd like to segue now to the topic of cyclocross and the Northampton race that you organized. So first off, do you think we need to actually just briefly describe what the heck cyclocross is? Can you do that in like 30 seconds or less?
Sure. Yeah. It's the equivalent of cross-country running for road cycling. So we are racing on a grass course that would be similar to a cross-country running course. We're doing multiple laps. We're riding what appear to be road bikes, but with knobby tires. There's a aspect of steeplechase and the original.
There's a splash of steeplechase in there.
Yeah, sure. And the original cyclocross races were essentially steeplechases. You were racing from the steeple to steeple. You were racing across the countryside on essentially a road bike. And so just like steeplechase is this weird version of that, this modernized antiseptic version of that, cyclocross is a little bit like that too. And so, but a cross-country running course is laps of a cross-country running loop would be very similar to what you would have in a cyclocross course. So you're forced to run at times, this mounting and dismounting. And the season for the sport is September to February. In New England, it's pretty much September to December. We stop just before Christmas here. So you get all kinds of weather, mud, dry conditions. It's hot in September. It rains. Sometimes we're racing on the snow. So you get all kinds of different conditions.
That's a great description.
The races are anywhere from 30 to 60. Yeah, it's 30 to 60 minute races.
And they're timed.
Full gas the whole time, sprinting out of every corner, maximum intensity for the duration of the race.
So you're the organizer of one of the oldest cyclocross races in New England, right? Northampton, otherwise known as NoHo.
Yeah, in the country.
In the country. So when did you start this, and why did you start this race?
I didn't start it. I took it over. I don't know how long it existed before I took it over. There's a lot of legends around that, but there has always been some kind of mountain bike race / cyclocross race in the Apple Orchard area on campus at UMass, in the woods behind the Orchard Hill dorm, the observatory area. Before I got to UMass, Paul Curley tells me they raced there in the 70s. So I don't have record of that. I don't have a direct line back to when the events were happening up there. But when I got to UMass in 1990, it was a very mediocre collegiate mountain bike race, just a small, fun what you brung kind of mountain bike race. And it was in the fall. And I did it on my cyclocross bike. And I do have pictures of this, as a freshman on my cyclocross bike. There were only a couple of us that raced cyclocross at the time. And I just said to the club, I was like, y'all, this would be so much better as a cyclocross race. Let me take it over next year as like a thing that I'll do for the club. And I did that with a guy named Mike Horner, who was also one of my early mentors and guy I raced full time with and traveled with, who was at UMass at the time. And Mike and I together co-promoted it that next year. So that was 1991 that I took it over. I got to UMass in the fall in 90. So fall in 1991. When I was a sophomore, I was 19. I started organizing it.
That's an impressive stretch of time. And you had it every year? Did it even go during COVID? Just curious.
We skipped a year due to COVID.
Okay.
That's the only one we've missed. So I think we're at 34 years. It's something like 50 editions. Actually, next year will be the 49th and 50th editions because we're a double weekend now. We weren't always 2 days. For most of the first half of it, it was just a single day. But then we we switched to it. We added a double weekend. So once we added double weekends, I think we're coming up on the 50th edition, something like 35 years.
Adam, what makes it so special, right? Like what makes NoHo so legendary for all of us that know it, but for maybe some folks that haven't heard of the race, or the runners or the swimmers or the skiers, what makes this NoHo event so special?
Well, so it's a little bit of history and a little about what makes it special now. Those things we probably could separate them, but they're certainly tied in because it's tied into the longevity of the event. I just love cyclocross and was one of the first people to sort of commit to cyclocross as like a primary discipline. It used to be that you did cross like as your second thing. You didn't take it seriously. And there were a few of us that did and wanted cyclocross to be our primary discipline. And we're bringing home videotapes from Europe, or, like went to Switzerland to race in the mid 90s to like really see what it was like. And I learned from Paul, I learned a lot about that from Paul Curley. And so I just had this idea that I wanted cool race and I had an area to work with. And so I think what happened at first was we just had a great course and I made a cool flyer. I brought all my 80s punk zine skills, my guerrilla marketing ability to the race. I made a cool flyer and passed that flyer around like it was my band and I was promoting my band for shows and stuff. I mean, it was the same approach and that worked. People liked it. It felt special. And that weekend was always UMass and Putney. Putney's the Putney cross race has been around for as long as the Northampton race at the time the UMass race has been. We used to always be on the same weekend. And that became the biggest weekend of cross in New England for many, many years.
At the West Hill shop?
Yeah, the West Hill race, which still happens. But UMass was the first race to get over 500 racers. That had never happened before in New England. I don't know if it happened in other places, but we broke that barrier of 500 racers in a day. From there, we started having this idea. I went and spent the winter in Switzerland doing UCI races in Switzerland. And when I came back, I was like, we could do this every weekend in New England. There was the Super Cup and we were starting to have national series and other bigger UCI races. And I said, and I was working with some folks in the Mid-Atlantic for a Monkey Hill cyclocross that they had. Andrew Albright had made his race UCI. And so in 2000, I took over the New England Cyclocross Series from Tom Stevens, and I had been helping him with that. We made UMass a UCI race, and I came up with this 3-year plan to make the New England Series just the biggest races and all of them UCI. And so that happened in 2003, and that's the era of Gloucester, Warwick, Providence, Amherst, the golden era of cyclocross nationally, but also in New England, where we had a professional cyclocross circuit in New England. So I was running that. I was running, the UMass cyclocross at the time, or the Amherst. We started calling it the Amherst International. Wasn't using it to promote CycleSmart yet. I was trying to bring in sponsors, and so I wasn't putting my business in front of it quite yet. I wanted to get credit as the organizer, but I wanted to sell that title sponsorship. So it was the Amherst International for a while, and then we moved to Northampton in 2005, I believe, and became the CycleSmart International. So I think that's that legacy, both a pioneering legacy, like part of the foundation of New England Cross, and then that organic growth, and then always like leading the way, leading by example, trying to show everybody like, hey, you can set your course up this way, you can make your race bigger, you can give the women equal prize money. We were the first ones to have a UCI race that had equal prize money for women. That hadn't been done before, things like that. Now, why is it huge, or why is it still popular, or why is it's still the biggest race in New England? We're just barely holding on to that title. Because there's some other great races, very popular races. And post-pandemic, we've lost a lot of institutional knowledge. People who've come in since the pandemic have no idea of the history of the Northampton cyclocross. They don't know why it's special. Holding on to that FOMO and getting people to say, hey, this is a race you can't miss, that has gotten very hard to do if you're not on TikTok or doing that kind of buzzy social media. And we never had to do that before. We just had to put our great race on and everybody showed up for it. And it's not like that anymore. So how are we holding on to that now? Well, really, I would say a big part of it is JAM and the NCC and all of the folks who live in the Valley.
Can you explain what those are? We try not to do acronyms on the show because
Yeah. Yeah. So I haven't lived in Northampton since 2005. I live in Boston now. So it's not my community anymore. I go back there to put the race on at a place that I used to live where I was very invested in growing the community. And we started the Northampton Cycling Club. So that's the NCC. Al Donahue, who is a senior associate coach for me, started the Jam Fund, which is a cycling team that's affiliated with the NCC, but is their sort of elite development team, if you can push those things together.
And they run the Grand Fundo, correct?
That's right.
Their big event. Yeah.
Their primary fundraiser for the club and where the money for their grants and their budget comes from is the Jam Fundo. It's in mid-July. Put it on your calendar. It's for a good cause. And so Al had always coached. I coached Jeremy Powers when he was a junior, and then John Rahul coached him for a while. And then Al ended up coaching him through the biggest part of his career. And so Al and Jeremy and another friend of ours named Mukunda Feldman started the Jam Fund.
Mukunda, I've got stories about Mukunda, but we won't dive into them.
Yeah,
right
we all
now.
have Mukunda stories.
Mukunda. Yeah.
So the race would be done without them. I couldn't do it without them. And I work remotely. I answer emails. I'm in charge of the vision of the race. I make the schedule. I do the website. I back the event. But my crew, my race organizing crew that have worked for the race now for 20 plus years, they shovel the coal. They do the hard work. Sometimes I have this feeling of, and I've said this many times, like I always have this feeling that the race runs itself. And Al pointed out to me many times that it's like, he didn't like it when I would say that. He's like, the race doesn't run itself. We are working really hard out there. And he is 100% right. That was always my feeling, but it's because of all that, work that happens behind the scenes and shoveling coal that they really work hard to keep
Shout
it going.
out to your crew. So
yeah,
Adam,
there's no race without them.
Adam, what is your favorite domestic and international course that you've raced on for cyclocross?
I really miss Warwick.
So that doesn't exist anymore.
No, it was always the first weekend of December, and it was the final weekend of the New England Series. And, one of our UCI races, it's basically like a combo of like woods and beach. It was right on the water in Warwick, Rhode Island. And so there were like long runs and beach sections and like sand riding, not just sand running, but also like turns in the sand and like back up into the woods. That was I've only won 2 UCI cyclocross events, and that was one of the ones that I won. It was often icy. There's often snow on the ground, bad weather. And so the years that it was icy, especially, really suited me and I had good rides there. I'd say that's one that I really miss that doesn't happen anymore. Where I just won nationals at Louisville is an amazing venue at Joe Creason. The courses they put together, I won there in 2018 as well. And then we raced there last year also. And so all the different versions of the course they've come up with there, I do have to say, I've come to really like that venue for maybe obvious reasons.
I'd love to hear about your nationals recap. Can you tell us a little bit about Nats?
Yeah, sure.
So you were in the 50 plus category, right?
Yeah.
This is what you started in. And how did the race go down?
Well, I feel like I have to start, without making the story too long, I have to start with last year's race because it was at same place and same 50 plus. And I was really keen and hoping that I would win last year as well. And I rode a very different race last year. It was mostly dry and it was going to be a group race. And I just covered the attacks and stayed in the group and almost raced it like a criterium or a road race. And on the 2 to go lap, my pedal broke and came off the spindle. And it happened just after I had passed the pit going into 2 to go.
What'd you do?
It was like a group of 6 of us. I tried to hold it on with my foot and pedal and see if I could stay connected to the group. But we were going into those critical last 2 laps of racing where like I had just kind of neutralized everything and I felt like I had it under control. And I lost 30 seconds trying to get to the pit. Eventually I had the pedal in my hand and I rode one-footed with my foot on the spindle to get to the pit. But I didn't make that time back up, and I think I got 6th place, and that was bitterly disappointing to me. I did not gotten second at the road and crit nationals that summer as well, so I had gotten second twice, and then I thought, well, I can salvage things here, and then I had my pedal in my hand. So, this is a good lesson for me in detachment. I was the defending champion. I had won the year before in Hartford. I really had grown. The jersey is intoxicating. When you have it, you want to keep it. And I had let myself get a little too emotionally attached to being the national champion. It's not just winning nationals. You get the whole year. You get to be the national champion.
Awesome.
It's not good for your ego, and it's good to stay detached from it. And this was maybe a good lesson in that. So this year was this strange mix of wanting my revenge, but also like, hey man, just go ride your race. Like that is a feeling you have to let go of. And I battled those feelings leading up to the event a lot. I had to do a lot of self-coaching leading into this race because I was mad still. And I was trying so hard not to be mad. And I didn't want to ride that way, but I had prepared really well. And I knew I was going good. I really wanted to show everybody that I was the best. And I don't think that's great. That's not the position I normally want to come from. But what I ended up doing is just riding my own race, to be honest. I just stayed focused and calm and as best I could. And my strategy was to ride from the front rather than like let the group form or play any games. It had been freezing and thawing, and the course was thawing for the hour that we were racing. So it was like icy underneath and like fake frosting on top, super treacherous, a heavier course. Drafting was going to be less important. So I got into my pedal right away. I won the start and I just rode. I didn't wait for anybody. I didn't care if anybody was on my wheel. The guys that I knew that were strong that I was worried about, instead of trying to let them lead and wait for my moment, I wanted to use my good technique to make them chase me. And so I rode from the front and I led from start to finish. And exactly as I had hoped, guys would go over their limit to try to ride with me and make a mistake, or they'd make a mistake and have to chase back up. Some of my main competitors lost over 30 seconds to me on the first lap because they were back trying to run things that they should have been riding or trying to ride things they should have been running. And I had things dialed and I was on a good day. And so I was never over my limit. Cool. Yeah. And I managed to get out to like a 20+ second gap. It got a little close to the finish. I only won by 3 seconds. It wasn't as close as that gap shows. I celebrated a bit, but I flatted. I had a slow leak and I had to change bikes on the last lap. And someone was coming for me. A rider who got second had ripped 2 very fast. His last 2 laps were like 10 seconds faster than we had been previously riding. And so I knew it was coming. Austin, I'm sorry that I'm blanking on his last name right now. Yeah.
We'll look it up in the results.
Well, the reason why it doesn't immediately come to mind is one, because I forget my friends' names, but also I hadn't raced against him all year. And so when he's catching me and I hear people cheering for him, at first I'm like, are they cheering for someone that I just lapped? Like, who is close to me? Because I'd been alone the whole race. Mm-hmm. He ripped 2 really big laps. He got very close. But once I changed bikes, then I emptied the tank and I opened the gap back up and was clear sailing from the second pit to the finish. And so I was able to just ride carefully and let him close the gap and celebrate through the start finish line. But I probably rode a 10-second faster last lap than what I actually recorded because I finally let loose.
Was this your favorite national champion jersey, would you say?
No, I think the first one in Hartford in 2017 or 2018, because it was just, I wasn't a big winner when I was a pro. I was a block puncher, as I describe it. I was a good sprinter, but like my job as a pro was not often to win, and I didn't do it often. I was a good lead out guy and I could consistently get top 5. I could be on the podium. But, I wasn't the best guy. I was just good at my job. And so as a master, it's a completely different thing. I am one of the strongest guys, and that's not a part of my racing experience normally. But I still had to prove that to myself. And so I waited until I was 45 to start racing masters. And so winning that first one in Hartford, I really focused on that one. Flynn was still just a baby. Similarly, I led from start to finish. And so that was like that felt like a career achievement. I think that's the most special one. They're all amazing though.
That's a good segue. I think you had some good lessons after your pedal mishap before. It sounded like some parental lessons or life lessons. So let's get into a little bit of parenting.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're a family man, obviously. We talked about your kid here, Flynn, just briefly, and you're a businessman, you're an entrepreneur. You're obviously an elite athlete as well. How do you go about balancing work, family, and fitness? And full disclosure, I wrote a book on this topic a couple of years ago called The Everyday Athlete. And you kind of fit it to a T. So, we want to sort of talk about parenting here a bit with someone who appears to have it nailed down.
Well, and as you know, anyone who appears to have it nailed down doesn't, or you're not seeing all of it, right?
Yes.
I do share a lot on social media and Instagram in particular. And you share those joyful moments or even poignant ones, but I often describe those moments as like single-handed parenting. Like if you can hold your phone up and take a video, it's because it's going well. You don't post the two-handed parenting moments because if your kid's punching you in the face or having a meltdown or you're having to restrain them or like all the things that we don't talk about that are challenging about parenting that you either don't talk about because you're worried about what it says about your parenting or you're embarrassed about the challenges that you're having with your kid. Like we don't put that stuff on social media, and it's part of my parenting process too. I'm dealing with that stuff too, and it's harder to talk about that stuff. But so I only have one kid. I mean, I raised 3 little sisters. I did not have I certainly can't look to my own father for modeling, except I don't want to say except in the negative, but my parenting is driven by trying to give my child the experiences that I didn't have or I didn't get. And someone left me a comment recently, someone who knew me in high school, to one of my posts and said, Adam, you're the father you deserve. And that really got me, right? It gets me now.
Yeah.
That she knows me just well enough to have known about my childhood. And I don't want to exaggerate that. Like I would say that my sisters and I were loved, and things could have been much, much worse. At worst, we were maybe, you can't take care of 4 kids yourself. So there's some benign neglect that happens there. It certainly wasn't an abusive environment, right? But like we didn't have the things that we needed. And that's, I don't want to pretend it was worse than it is. No one was on drugs. We didn't get the shit kicked out of us. Like it just could have been a lot worse. But it was challenging. It was hard. It's Brockton, right? We're trying to survive Brockton, and we did. And I think that's a big accomplishment. So I want my kid to understand what it was like growing up on the east side of Brockton without having to grow up on the east side of Brockton. I think we all parent from that perspective. Living in Dorchester is a way to do that. He's having a very similar experience in terms of class and race diversity and who his friends are and the culture that he exists in. But we're in a much more financially secure environment. He has 2 parents who are there for him every day and love him very much. And so that's the context in which I would say that I'm parenting right now.
In addition to that, though, has Flynn caught the endurance bug?
He has. He's funny. He doesn't like to go hard. He doesn't have that. Some of the other kids that he's racing against, you can see some of these kids are like, they just have that. The race starts and they're making themselves suffer from start to finish. Flynn's gotten better at it, but he'll do a lot of looking around and he only rides as hard as he has to, which is a good skill also.
And how old is he?
He's 9.
He's 9, okay.
Because I took, Adam, to be clear, and we've talked about this on the podcast a little bit, I took all the fun out of endurance sports with my kids. I needed a endurance parenting coach, okay? Because I didn't know how to make it fun. It was like, let's go ride hard, let's go run hard, let's go cross country ski hard, and I took the fun out of it, and that's a big lesson for me that I do sort of talk about on this podcast, because I think the age group of the people listening here are parental age. In fairness, my 19-year-old daughter, who's home from college, did go for a run with me this past weekend.
That's great. That's successful.
I'm taking that as a win.
That's right.
For many, many years, I said, "Hey, anyone want to go for a run or a ride or a ski?" And they didn't want to go, and I blame myself for that. But there was some lessons in doing that.
Yeah, I think my approach there, I'm very sensitive about that, and I didn't want to make that mistake, and I was very afraid of that. Right. My goal was to present him with everything, just put everything in front of him, and I kept saying like, It doesn't have to be bikes, and I don't want to ruin bikes for him because, of course, secretly I want him to race bikes, right?
Of
But
course.
the only way that's going to happen is if he chooses it. And if I make it available to him and he chooses it and I can support him, then that's how that is going to happen. But I have to stay completely detached from that. What I am enjoying is that right now he likes riding bikes. He likes going to the races. He has a group of friends that he hangs out with at the races. He loves racing. He loves cyclocross. He likes road racing. He loves criteriums. My goal is to just not ruin that. I don't care what place he gets. He doesn't have to ride during the week, and usually he doesn't. Often the race is the only riding he does all week. He's 9. It's fine. I made him come to cyclocross practice on Wednesday nights this year because I told him if he wanted to race on the weekends, he had to do 1 practice a week, just like he does for soccer. So he also plays soccer, and he was going to soccer practice 2 days a week, and he had a game on the weekend. So then I was able to say, okay, bud, you told me that you go fast at the races. I'm not going to make you train, but I want you to just come to practice once a week, and then you can ride around, you do whatever you want, but you got to come with. And part of it was childcare related. His mom works late on Wednesdays. He asked to come to practice with me, but he would have a good time.
It was his choice. It was his choice.
Yeah, to a degree, he was fine. He does have a good time, but yeah, I have to support without pressure and make sure it's not dad's thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not my thing that I'm making him do. I invite him. If he says no, he doesn't have to come. I remind him sometimes when he says he doesn't want to come that, like, hey, buddy, every time you come with me, you have a blast and you tell me what a great time you have. But, he's got a switch. And so sometimes sitting on the couch and playing video games it's hard to overcome that momentum to continue with that activity. So that's my strategy right now. And I just want to enjoy this while he's picking bikes and he wants to hang out with me. That's it. I will take that. And if that's all it ever is, that's fine.
You're in a sweet spot right now, Adam.
I know.
Enjoy it.
I know. Yeah,
Embrace
that's right.
it.
He's turned into my activity partner, and parenting has gotten easier for me once we got into that zone. But, when we signed him up for summer camps, he does a week of zoo camp and a week of nature camp and a week of art camp and soccer camp. And he comes to cross camp as well. And so I just want him to, he's got to be passionate about something. He doesn't have to pick that while he's 9.
Yeah, exactly. So Adam, we're going to start closing out some of the, we have some couple of final fun questions for our podcast guests. One of them is, so you've raced your bike and trained all over the world. Is there an event that you can think of in New England, because this is a New England Endurance podcast, that you would suggest to our listeners as sort of a hidden gem that, like, you got to get this on the calendar? You actually mentioned the Jam Fund.
The Fundo.
Are there any others?
The Grand Fundo.
Yeah, if you like gravel and you want to do, let's say, an event that's like a middle ground between like a gravel race and a tour, the Fundo is great. You ride it as hard as you want, and then the snacks are amazing, right? But it's super challenging terrain, and I love Western Mass, so any chance to ride on dirt roads in Western Mass on a route that someone painstakingly marked for you, that includes like double track and like trails you would never find on your own, Fundo's it. Aside from that, yeah, 100% Beverly Criterium.
Shout out to the North Shore, baby.
Yeah, Paul Boudreau was the organizer of the Gloucester Cyclocross, which, was our biggest cyclocross race, bigger than Northampton for many years, and one of the biggest, if not the biggest race in the country. And, we all miss it dearly. But Paul also put on a really amazing downtown criterium. And we just do not have enough downtown criteriums anymore. And the ones that we have aren't big in that way. For a while, we had Fitchburg and Exeter and Beverly, and a few others that had popped up, and they're all gone. And Paul had started putting on a cyclocross race at the beach in Beverly. That was also like a dream that he'd always had. He'd always imagined a cyclocross race at the beach, and it was a fine cyclocross race, a little bit shoehorned into a small spot.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't have the bandwidth to do both the criterium and the cross race. Paul and I are good friends. I coached him for a long time, but also we always talk, and we talk about promotion stuff. We've worked together for years and years. And I just kept needling him. Paul, we need the Crip back. If you can only do one, I'm telling you that we have plenty of cross races. The cross race at the beach was great. It's nothing like the criterium that you put on. The crit is special and we need it. Like we need that more than we need the cross race. And I finally got him to do it. And there were some things they were doing in downtown Beverly. They were working on some crosswalks and there was some construction happening. Once that was done, he brought the Beverly crit back this year. And the numbers weren't as big as they were pre-pandemic, but I think they will be again. And if we could have more, you don't have to be a bike racer to enjoy the Beverly Criterium. It's a real spectacle and it's really fun to race. It feels like a professional criterium, the kind of race that I made my living doing. I would say Beverly and also New Haven. I feel terrible if I left out New Haven. New Haven Grand Prix is also a professional level twilight criterium, downtown New Haven around the quad at Yale.
We interviewed Ben and Brian Wolf. Did he mention that, Eric? I feel like that he did mention New Haven.
I think he did. I think he definitely mentioned that event.
They're modest. They're modest. They probably didn't talk about how exceptional that race is. And it's on the level of any professional criterium that I've done anywhere around the country.
That's cool.
But I think it's a great, I'm actually really happy that you mentioned the criterion, because your answer in a way is a lot of the answers have been races that you should go participate in, like when we asked that question. But I think, Adam, if I could, put words in your mouth, that's also an event to go and watch, even if you don't race, because criterium under, at night in a cool little town with cool coffee shops,
beer garden.
Cool
There's a beer garden
stores and some cool vendors.
Yeah. It's an event.
Like it's an event to go see about the endurance community. So I think you could look at it in two ways. One, go race, go have a good time. But if not, go and support local racing and have a great time watching the race. Yeah.
And it's unmistakably amazing. Like sometimes I'll watch the Cat 3 race. So for the people who aren't familiar with bike racing, let's say like the middle level amateur category, just before the elite race. And I cannot believe how fast they're going. I can't believe how close together they are riding. I can't believe how far they're leaned over in the turns. And sometimes I'll stand in the corner and be like, we go faster than this in the race that I'm in. We're going to go fast. Like it's inconceivable to me. So I can only imagine how amazing it looks to watch the pros go through. If the amateurs are going 27 miles an hour and the pros are going 30 miles an hour, it's quite a spectacle.
That's great. Oh, that's great. That's a great answer. And I think the spectator component of endurance community in New England has not actually been a conversation that we have had. So I think that's a really neat,
I think a lot of those races have, they have a beginner category and amateur category. Come give it a run, check it out, and then stick around and watch the pros.
For sure. Cyclocross has always been great.
That's right.
About that. And that was one thing about that Gloucester event that you could come and see some amazing races. All right. This is it, Adam. You've done great, but this is the big final question. Okay. This is what people tune in for. You've had the opportunity to race all over the world, as Art said. You've mentioned Switzerland, races, Louisville, what have you. But tell us why you agree that New England is the greatest region in the United States for endurance sports.
Do you actually believe that? We have the perfect mix of 4 seasons of weather, all different terrain, river valleys, mountains, coastline. We have the perfect mix of population density and sparsity. So there's enough people and enough money to make things happen, but enough space to put on amazing events in great terrain when you need it, right? So you can do the Boston Marathon, or you can do the Tour of the Hill Towns in Western Mass and ride, up into the hill towns from the Pioneer Valley into the Berkshires. So that diversity of population, where there's population density, but also some rural spots. I also think it's different here culturally in a way that is the reason that I come back. And even though I've lived in so many different places for racing and spent the winters in Tucson or Athens, Georgia, or, I live in Massachusetts for a reason. And when you see what's happening around the country right now, politically, and like what's happening to trans folks, especially, there's an inclusiveness and an acceptance and a way that we take care of each other in New England and in Massachusetts, a commonwealth, as it were. I believe in that idea of commonwealth, collectiveness, and it's different here. And I think that shows up in our sports. We sport each other in a particular way. And maybe you can tie it back to that initial idea of, why are we playing sports? Yeah, we're competitive and we want to do our best, but we want to make sure there's a space for everybody and that we're all enjoying it. It's inclusive and supportive, and we keep the barriers to entry low while still having a professional class. We can do both of those things. I try to do that with Northampton, and I think it's a very New England way to do it.
That's a good answer. I love the density and sparsity. I keep that in my head. It's a way to articulate certainly the incredible landscape that we have here. That's just sticking with me from what you said. So it's really, really cool. Adam, thank you so much for being a guest on the New England Endurance podcast. As a thank you, you will be getting a cookie packed box from Lark Fine Foods.
Amazing.
Lark Fine Foods is a 100% women-owned specialty food company baking delicious small batch cookies inspired by grown-up consumers with sophisticated tastes. And how about this? I'm going to bring it all home here. They were one of the original sponsors of the first Beverly Criteria. How about that?
Amazing.
They were sampling cookies at that.
Amazing.
So also the other sponsors are The Everyday Athlete, written by my esteemed co-host here, a book about balancing work, family, and fitness, and Kinetic. Experience the brain-boosting benefits of ketones on demand at drinkkinetic.com. That's KENETIK.com.
Adam, thank you so much for joining us today, buddy. I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
awesome
thanks for having me.
you.
Yeah, glad we could get it done.
Yeah. And thanks everybody for listening to the New England Endurance podcast. We're going to be tagging a bunch of things in our Instagram. We're going to tag CycleSmart, but if you want to check out CycleSmart, you can go to cycle-smart.com or visit at Adam Myerson on all the socials. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. We're now on YouTube. And until next time, keep pushing your limits and get out there and enjoy the beautiful terrain of New England. Thank you.